The last 4 years haven't been easy for anyone who considers themselves to be a citizen of the world. And with the current government, it doesn't look like that's going to change anytime soon. So when we're asked what will Best for Britain do next, it doesn't feel like the moment for us to give up now. Will we shut up shop or will we fight on? The answer is easy. We haven't given up, and neither have you.
We will continue standing up for a healthier, happier and more equal society.
Standing up for women's rights and equality for all.
Standing up for global cooperation on climate change.
Protecting our National Health Service.
Standing up for equal votes and a fairer voting system.
For innovation, for new economic models and using tech for good.
We will defend civil liberties and the right to protest.
Standing up for the refugees and those in need.
We will continue fighting to make Britain a compassionate country.
This is our vision for an inclusive, confident and united Britain that sits at the heart of Europe and the world. A Britain that's the best version of itself and a country you can all be proud of. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Naomi Smith, Chief Executive of the cross-party internationalist campaign group Best for Britain, and this is our relaunch, so welcome and thank you. Please note that Best for Britain is non-aligned and takes no view on the current elections. We were set up in 2017 as a reactive campaign, responding to an emergency. Internationalist values were under threat. Britons with multiple citizenships and cultural identities were cast as citizens of nowhere, and multilaterally brokered peace in Northern Ireland was at risk. Since we left the European Union and the subsequent transition period, we have been asked repeatedly what Best for Britain is still for and what it hopes to achieve. So here it is. We have transitioned from being a temporary campaign against Brexit to a permanent organisation for internationalist values and working with the world. Many individuals worked very hard, but collectively, those who shared our values were complacent for too long. Just a decade ago, Brexit felt inconceivable to many. We must never again allow or accept a decline in trust of multilateral dialogue and internationalist solutions. Yes, Brexit was in part driven by xenophobia, nativism, and a boosterish sense of British exceptionalism. But our brand new data that I'm going to be talking about later shows a much more positive outlook. Our lesson is not to shut up shop, but never to allow internationalists to repeat that error of complacency again. Internationalism isn't an abstract philosophical theory, it's a practical approach that can help improve the world we live in, our lives, the lives of future generations in tangible and profound ways. Peace, security, research, climate solutions, cures, vaccines, trade, and more. We won't let such important values become the subject of cynicism. We have a lot to work with, And Best for Britain and those who share our worldview must never allow society to flirt with isolationist impulses again. If the pandemic has reaffirmed anything, it's that we are not better off alone. So, Best for Britain's new mission is informed by the often brutal political and emotional journey that has taken us to this point. For those of us who have spent 5 years of our lives fighting this country's self-imposed isolationism, the options have been to learn and adapt or get off the pitch. And that's the first thing you need to know today. We are still on the field, and we are staying on the field, but as a proactive rather than reactive force in British politics. And a big part of the reason we are internationalists is our patriotism. We are internationalist patriots. You can be an Austrian, proud of Mozart, a Brit, proud of Shakespeare, and an American, proud of Martin Luther King, without denying the important role of international cooperation and integration between and among nations to address common problems and shared interests. Over the past few months, Best for Britain has reached out in new directions, working ever more closely with cross-party groups in Westminster. One of our particular areas of focus is, of course, international trade, and we are proud to be supporting the Cross-Party Trade and Business Commission, launched earlier this month by Hilary Benn MP and Chairman of Virgin Group Peter Norris. It includes MPs from all major UK parties, all 4 nations of the UK, as well as industrialists from every major sector of the economy. It will scrutinise the TCA and other trade deals and make rapid recommendations for their improvement. But we've also stuck to our bread and butter, producing granular public opinion insights. And so rather than guessing at what Best for Britain's role should be in a post-Brexit world, we've sought evidence, carrying out some very detailed research into what the nation thinks about Britain's international role now and in the future, and it's enlightening. We partnered with Number Cruncher Politics to poll more than 3,000 Britons last month, and we oversampled by a further 1,000 respondents 2 key groups: frontline workers who got us through the last year, and job creators, business owners and business leaders who in no small part can help us grow out of the worst recession of 300 years. This was a heavyweight piece of research, and I'd urge you all to read the report we have just hit publish on, a truly global UK voters' views on working with the world. It contains all the detail, and you can find it at bestforbritain.org/truly-global-UK, but I will run through some top lines now. The results show that views on Britain's international role don't divide neatly along the old Leave, Remain, fracture lines. In fact, very far from it. Not only that, on key issues, there is overwhelming agreement from both sides on the importance of close international relations. For example, 79% of people want the UK to work with international bodies to tackle climate change, 78% to support global cooperation on tackling the pandemic, 76% on working with other countries to deal with threats from the likes of Russia and China. 81% want cooperation with international bodies on science and research, and that rises to 91% among Conservative voters from 2019. 79% of Remainers and 72% of Leavers support countries working together to regulate the social media giants. And there is overwhelming support for cooperation across the UK by region, gender, age group, ethnicity, and political outlook. In other words, when you strip away the divisive shell of Brexit, Britons are inherently internationalist. And we want to be able to track that sentiment over time. So today we are also introducing a first of its kind Internationalism Index. Our index splits the UK population into 3 equal groupings based on high, medium, or low support for internationalist policies. And initial findings give us great cause for optimism. The median British voter is internationalist, and future elections could well be swung by those who support cooperation with other countries on a wide range of issues. More details are available on request, but just looking at the medium internationalist group, we see 76% believe Britain is better solving the world's greatest challenges through cooperation, while only 15% disagree. And 91% believe the pandemic has taught us that countries must work together because nobody is safe until everybody is safe. Crucially, the medium segment voted Leave by 54%. So those positive views on cooperation are from a predominantly Leaver group. It's proof that our country is far from being the xenophobic, inward-looking island that some who frankly should know better would have us believe. Our research shows even those who are least internationalist in that low internationalism group expect the government to work with the world on key challenges. There is an overwhelming need, therefore, in civil society for a group that stands up to the government on internationalist issues, be they trade, climate change or security, that can provide a voice for those in any party, including the party of government, when our leaders try to lead us down a self-defeating nativist path. And that is where a reinvigorated, re-energised and refocused Best for Britain comes in. We've done our due diligence and we know that Britons are inherently internationalist in outlook. And those business owners and leaders, those frontline workers I talked of that we oversampled, they too believe strongly that Britain's future is about working with the world. And we agree with them completely. We believe that a truly global Britain stands firm in its commitment to the treaties it signs, the financial aid it promises countries that need it most, and sets a clear example for all nations to follow. And that's why Best for Britain is here to stay, pushing for closer relationships with Europe and the world, and holding to account those whose political myopia serves only to damage all our futures. But much of what we want to uphold can't be achieved without wider democratic changes. Brexit was a symptom of a much wider malaise. And that's why we're also going to start campaigning for democratic equality, so that people are enfranchised and their votes not wasted. We'll stand up for much more decentralised decision-making, for power to be put back into local communities, so that people feel that democracy is something that they do, rather than something that is done to them. We'll support work that explores new economic models to help reduce the very wealth inequalities that were exploited by xenophobes who blamed migrants rather than failed socioeconomic policies for their existence. And we will make openness and inclusiveness a defining part of Britishness. And we believe that technology used for good has the ability to solve or drastically reduce many of the world's crises, to boost educational attainment, health outcomes, and better distribute the proceeds of economic growth. We believe that there is more that unites us than divides us, and that the culture war being waged for political interests on the people of this country exposes small disagreements and turns them into deep-running societal divides. We stand firm in our commitment to building consensus and providing the common ground that paves the way for a forward-thinking government to take us back to being world-leading, not bombastically pursuing us being world-beating. Because that is what is best for Britain. Thank you very much. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce our first guest speaker, a politician whose career leaves them exceptionally well qualified to talk about all of this and more. Former Shadow Foreign Minister and current Shadow Secretary for International Trade, the Right Honourable Emily Thornberry. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me to speak here today, and thank you. Let me thank everybody who's taking part in this, in what is a very welcome, very hopeful, and a very necessary moment, not just in the life of Best for Britain, but in the recent history of internationalist campaigning in our country. You know that the 5th anniversary of the Brexit referendum is only 8 weeks away now. And I know that there'll be some people on both sides of the debate who can't wait to spend that day fighting all the old battles and making all the old arguments in a never-ending contest to prove who was right. And if that's what people want to do, then good luck to them. But frankly, I can't imagine a bigger waste of everybody's time, especially when there is so much else. There is so much else we need to be focusing on as a country. And that's why today's relaunch of Best for Britain feels like such an important moment for me. And that's why I'm so pleased to be involved. It's a chance to move beyond the Brexit debate, a chance to discuss the future and not the past, and most importantly, a chance to redefine what it means here in Britain to be an internationalist. We all know for decades in our country, if you called yourself an internationalist, if you argued that Britain's best interests are served by working with others around the world, you found yourself constantly being dragged back into a debate about whether Britain was better off in or out of Europe, joining the single currency, signing the latest EU treaty. And that was the prism through which every discussion was seen. As internationalists, we have a choice now. We can stay trapped in that debate. We can continue to fight that battle on each anniversary of the Brexit vote or before each and every general election. Or we can choose to leave that past behind and to set out a new and positive, forward-looking vision for the future of our country based on internationalist ideals, based on our desire for cooperation overseas, and crucially, based on the reality that we are now in a post-Brexit era. Not only is Best for Britain doing that today, it's demonstrating through the surveys published with today's report, it is very much what the British people want to do. And on that note, let me just say a few words about the issues raised by Best for Britain in relation to international trade. Because I think that if any issue captures the essence of what I take from this relaunch today, is the issue of trade, and it boils down to three fundamental truths. The first is this: we are not going to rejoin the customs union or the single market. That ship sailed back in 2019. And second, therefore, we have to develop our own set of policies for UK trade, our own set of principles, our own set of priorities. But third, and most importantly, those priorities have to start with fixing our trading relationship with the European Union. And I believe that that's right, that we really must be doing that, not because of some ideological fixation on being close to Europe, but because of another simple truth, and that's this: the best and quickest and the simplest way to make up for the losses British exporters are currently facing as a result of our trading problems with Europe, not to go off in some pursuit of a whole bunch of other trade deals on the other side of the world, but it is to fix the problems that we have right now, right in front of us, in the exports that we are making to our nearest neighbours. And that should be our number one priority. I'm not revealing any secrets, nor, I hope, disturbing the non-partisan nature of our gathering today. And I say that the government's priorities when it comes to trade clearly lie in a different place. They're very much in the territory, I think, of leaving our trade with Europe behind, of dismissing the problems that businesses are facing and focusing on the new trade that they can strike with other countries elsewhere in the world. And let me tell you what my greatest fear is about that, why I think it's wrong to be adopting that approach from the perspective of what we're discussing today. There are trade deals out there waiting to be struck with a range of other countries, but the question is, at what price? Are we willing to do deals with countries who don't respect animal welfare on their farms, who destroy their rainforests for profit, or who abuse the human rights of their citizens? Because if we are, then we could do a dozen new trade deals, but in the process, we will undermine who it is we are. We will undermine the standards we are supposed to believe in at home. We will undermine the values we're supposed to stand for abroad. And we will still not come close to making up the losses of trade with Europe. So I think that today is hugely important as a way of saying collectively that we don't want to be stuck in the past and we want to move on beyond Brexit. But it is equally important for saying that we have a choice about that direction, the direction that our country is going to take next. And on trade and on every other issue, we need to say that we do not want to choose the route which turns away from our closest neighbour and turns away from what we believe in, so that we can sign deals with whoever will have us. We want instead to choose the route that is best for our exporters and our economy, best for our values and our standards, and ultimately best for Britain. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emily. Our next speaker is Sir Peter Westmacott, former British ambassador to Turkey, France, and notably the USA during the Obama-Biden administration. Over to you, Peter.
Thank you, Naomi, and thank you so much, Emily, for those very wise words. there's of course all sorts of reasons why we ended up with the result of the Brexit referendum, and I don't want to reopen the issues of sovereignty and deregulation, the rest of it. There's a couple of points that I thought I might just try and say a few things about. The first is, as you were saying, Naomi, that even though I come at this as an apolitical former civil servant who was representing the UK abroad, regardless of who was in power, whichever party in the United Kingdom, it does seem to me that there were some quite significant overlaps in the sentiment which was brought out by the result of the referendum, by the vote on back in June 2016, which was similar to what was going on in the United States at the time of Donald Trump being elected 6 months later. And I think that part of making a success of the new Britain, of where we are now, regardless of what we all thought about the referendum itself, is that we have to find ways of addressing the anger, the fear, the inequalities, the alienation of a lot of people who were going to vote hell no, even though it was sometimes against their own economic interest because their livelihood depended on exporting to the European Union. And if we haven't got structures and systems and political parties and sentiments and leadership in place which can make people make the best of themselves rather than feel angry and resentful, as a lot of people have in the past, and indeed not just a sense of emotion, but so many middle-class incomes in America and in Britain during the 10 years since the global financial crisis of 2007, 2008, have just been stagnant. And people are a bit fed up with that. They were then, they are now. So if we're going to live up to our full potential, I think a lot of the answer has to be here at home. Second point I want to make is let's try and make something real of the Global Britain slogan. For quite a long time during the campaign, I and other people like me whose job it was to try to represent Britain abroad kind of wondered what it all meant. Okay, we've now, to coin a phrase, got Brexit done, and we are now looking for a new role in the world, and we're trying to put some flesh on the bones of that concept. I think it's hugely important. I'm very encouraged that the polling, which Naomi's been talking about, shows that the British people, including lots of people who voted leave for their own reasons, strongly believe that the United Kingdom is internationalist and that we make the best difference for ourselves and for the rest of the world working together with allies. I'm very pleased to hear that because we bring an awful lot to the table. We may have left the European Union and the single market and the customs union and so on, but we are still a permanent member of the Security Council of the United Nations. We are still one of only 2 European countries with a serious defense capability in NATO. We're still important members of the Council of Europe and a whole lot of other conventions, the WTO, the WHO, and so on. The international organizations put together after the Second World War with a lot of help from the United Kingdom are still important, and we are still important players of it. So I think it's critically important that we keep that front and center in our own thinking about making a difference. Unfortunately, we did not agree and didn't want to negotiate a structured relationship with the European Union on defense and foreign policy as we negotiated Brexit. We're out of that. But already it's clear that informally and in a kind of de facto way, as individual crises come up, whether it's about Burma, whether it's about Myanmar, I should say, whether it's about dealing with bad behavior by Russia, whether it's about trying to put together the Iran nuclear deal, which Donald Trump tore up, the United Kingdom is already engaging closely with like-minded allies in Paris, in Berlin, in Washington, and many other places. And that is where we should be. The global challenges facing the world now have been almost accelerated by the process of COVID and the dramas and the issues of resilience and supply chain, which were thrown up by that, excessive dependence on single suppliers, the other side of the world. And we've got to deal with the climate issues, and we've got to deal with the rise of China. We've got to deal with what's going on in Russia. We've got extraordinary cybersecurity threats coming to all of us and from lots of different directions. And we have to address those issues together with our partners. So I think, and this year, by the way, we have an extraordinary opportunity for the United Kingdom to prove to the rest of the world that it really is internationalist and capable of making a difference. We're in the chair of the G7. Everybody's going to come to Cornwall at the end of June. And we're also going to be chairing the COP26 climate change conference in Glasgow at the end of the year. So big opportunities for the United Kingdom to show what it's made of and to show that even though we've left the European Union, we are very significant players. My last little comment is to say, and let us remember to make the best of the opportunity with a new United States president. Joe Biden, who I knew very well when he was the vice president, and a lot of those people who are working with him are people whom British diplomats, British politicians have known for many years because they were part, many of them, of the talented Obama team. They know us, we know them. And there is in the President of the United States somebody who does believe in allies, does believe in internationalism, does believe in NATO, does believe in engaging with the like-minded. So there's an opportunity there for us to do that. The first overseas trip that Joe Biden is going to be making will be coming to the United Kingdom. Those have been a little bit of a bumpy beginning in some respects. We've got to iron those bumps out. We've got to ensure that the personal relationships are good. And we've got to ensure that structurally we are engaged with America and other allies in making a difference. But my last little comment would be just to say, do not forget that Joe Biden is also somebody who is an Irish-American Catholic who only a few weeks ago was reminding people in a press conference that his great-grandfather left Ireland in a coffin ship because of what the Brits were doing to the family. Now, he and I have teased each other about whether he's more British or more Irish and so on. But there's an important point here, which is that anything that the United Kingdom is doing about making Brexit work, about the withdrawal agreement, about implementing different protocols to do with Northern Ireland, must take account of the extreme sensitivity that there is in the United States, not just in the White House, but amongst the 50 million American citizens of Irish origin. And we must work with them and be aware of their concerns, just as we are assuming our own responsibility for ensuring that nothing is done that jeopardizes the success of the Good Friday Agreement. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Peter. Wise words. Next up is former Minister for the Cabinet Office and Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, David Lidington, of course, a crucial player in trying to secure Theresa May's Brexit deal, and he now chairs RUSI and the Conservative European Forum. Welcome, David.
Thanks very much indeed, Naomi. I think what I welcome very much about the polling that you've highlighted is the way in which it gives the lie to the idea that there is some neat caricature of UK public opinion, London versus the rest, or old versus young, or left versus right. And actually, it seems to me that the cross-party lessons that should be drawn from the polling is that a sense of the interdependence of the United Kingdom's national interests with the interest of other countries and the need to work with other countries bilaterally and through multinational institutions is a way of serving the interests of our own nation. And my starting point is a very hard-headed assessment of where the UK national interest lies. It is that which leads me into a belief that at a time when the Pax Americana has been eroded, when we are moving into a much more multipolar world, when Russia and China in their different ways are challenging the international order established in the 1940s and 50s, that it is essential that the UK is active, nimble, forward-looking, and finding every day of the week ways in which to work with other countries to secure common objectives. We've seen this, and I think this has made a big impact on public opinion with COVID, where it is clear that for people in this country to be safe, we have to ensure vaccination supplies throughout the world, and also that the manufacturing capacity for vaccines and the technology transfer to facilitate more effective vaccinations, genomic analysis and so on, is made available where that is most needed. We're at a time when the directors of the security and intelligence agencies, not people who are normally written off as sort of fanciful, sort of emotional judges of public affairs, are saying that the climate emergency is probably the biggest strategic challenge to the security of the UK looking forward. If you talk to any chief constable in this country, they will tell you that it is almost impossible to find serious and organized crime now, which lacks an international dimension, whether that is financial crime, sexual abuse and child abuse, people smuggling drugs and counterfeit goods. An international action is needed to remedy those ills. If you look at the action of hostile and potentially hostile states, cyber attacks, information warfare, attempts to interfere in elections in different parts of the world, economic leverage, whether that is Russia's use of gas supply or China's attempts to punish Australia for the political stance that they have taken. And that action that we take needs to be done through alliances in the way Peter described, through using opportunities in the G7, through trying to bring in the three Asian powers to form a sort of D10 democratic alliance in the way that President Biden and the Prime Minister are advocating, and through multinational institutions. On climate, I think the government, like Peter, I think the government has a great opportunity this year. That's also going to involve some hard, detailed work. How do we make sure the UK emissions trading arrangements post-Brexit and any thought we give to carbon border adjustments is actually compatible with what the EU is also doing, because it would surely be crazy to find new ways to introduce additional trade friction to our arrangements. The great insight, it seemed to me, with China of the integrated review recently published was the recognition that it's not individual companies that matter so much as the risk that the West becomes dependent as the years pass on Chinese technology because we have not developed our own innovative and technological capacity sufficiently. That again is going to require international work and activism, whether that is about encouraging technological growth while avoiding new trade barriers, whether it involves pushing for plurilateral deals on key services and technologies, whether it involves sharing cyber defense lessons and intelligence, or paying greater attention than we've done in the past to global regulatory bodies, because it's no accident that China has given a very high priority to getting Chinese officials nominated to serve and lead those international regulatory institutes. And I would finally just draw attention to the challenge from Africa, which is multifarious in its nature. We are going to need to harness military intervention, such as the UK's contribution to the French-led initiatives in the Sahel, training of police and military forces, building state capacity, classic development assistance to very poor countries, work to help them on climate, disruption of the people trafficking and drug smuggling gangs. And that all points in part to the need for a strategic UK relationship with our neighbouring democracies in the continent of Europe, both on a bilateral basis, but also, I do believe, on the basis between the UK and the EU institutionally. And that is something that I hope, once the current age of aftershocks that have followed the seismic event of Brexit passes, we will see the government move back towards. And I think if you look at what the government has done in the Sahel, if you look at the olive branches which there are in the integrated review towards work with the EU and its member states, then I think I can find some hope and opportunity for argument in the future. I mean, no doubt that we serve our national interests by arguing for effective international partnerships.
Thank you very much, David. Our last speaker is another renowned internationalist, former member of the European Parliament, environmental champion, and of course MP for Brighton Pavilion. It's Caroline Lucas. Just before we go to Caroline, though, I would like to remind journalists watching, if you could just indicate by raising your hand using the Zoom function if you'd like to ask a question, we can begin to think about when we're going to bring you in after Caroline's speech. Over to you, Caroline.
Thanks so much, Naomi, and I'm delighted to join you for the relaunch of Best for Britain and to be part of this discussion about how an internationalist Britain might play a progressive and leading role on the global stage. And as others have said, it couldn't really be more urgent to define what that actually looks like. Global cooperation is clearly critical if that future is to be fairer, safer, and greener. Internationalism matters and it needs to be defended. We've learnt the hard way that it can never be taken for granted. From the climate emergency to the refugee crisis, from keeping fossil fuels in the ground to transforming democracy for the 21st century, Britain has an opportunity now to redefine global leadership and ensure that post-Brexit, we're engaged in building the bridges and alliances fit for the 21st century, rather than retreating into a backward-looking nostalgia. So I think the question is, how do we do that in a way that is consistent with our values? You know, just this morning on the Today programme, we had a big piece about how global Britain was kind of absolutely encapsulated by this vast new aircraft carrier. Well, really, is that what captures our values, or is it something more? I want to start with the climate and nature emergency, because the responsibility to show bold and honest global leadership couldn't be greater than there. If we're to have a chance of avoiding the worst of the catastrophe towards which we're heading, I think there are three tests of what that global climate leadership looks like. First of all, it has to ensure that justice is at the heart of climate action. True leadership from an outward-looking and future-facing global Britain would recognise our historic responsibility as the first country to industrialise for cumulative climate emissions in the atmosphere. And that means we have to go further and faster than most other countries. The second test is climate coherence, by which I mean all policies need to be aligned around that same objective, creating a world in which everyone can thrive with dignity and opportunity within the means of our one life-giving planet. So cutting international aid at exactly the same time that we're trying to show global leadership as hosts of the Glasgow Climate Summit could not be more incoherent and counterproductive. If we're to leverage more funding from other countries for climate action, as we must, then we need to be leading by example. And as the world begins to emerge, we hope, from the pandemic, the UK faces some choices. So as hosts of the G7, are we going to use that as a window dressing for more business as usual, or to really transform the future? Are we going to put bold initiatives on the agenda there? For example, a global fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty, so that we can together make sure that we keep fossil fuels in the ground. And the third test is around climate realism. In other words, action that is commensurate with the scale of the crisis that we face. The target of net zero by 2050 is frankly not ambitious enough. On current trends, we have just 10 years until 2030 at the latest before the global carbon budget is used up. That is the reality. That is the inconvenient truth. And I believe global leadership is telling the truth and acting on it. Just very
Caroline, sorry, carry on.
Sorry, if I'm out of time, I'm happy to stop, Naomi, if you need to move on. I was going to mention two other issues. One was around trade. Climate justice, coherence and realism should be the priority for every move we make on the global stage, including as we seek to forge new relationships and repair long-standing ones through trade. We have an opportunity to provide a clear direction of travel on the UK's new trading status, to set out a democratic, environmentally and socially just framework for a new and pioneering and independent ethical trade policy. And yet, as Emily set out, right now, the government's trade policy is totally unfit for purpose from the point of view of standards, from democratic scrutiny, from secret courts that can also undermine values of the kind that we want enshrined in trade agreements going forward. So if we're to mean anything as global Britain, it means we are genuinely members of a global community that others respect. That means being good citizens and aligning trade policy with global environmental, climate and social objectives. And finally, I think progressive global leadership has to defend the rule of law, yes, but it also has to be about developing new international obligations, creating new frameworks for accountability, like making ecocide an internationally punishable crime. I'm delighted to be part of this relaunch for Best for Britain to define what global leadership looks like in the 21st century, leadership that is looking forward, not back, leadership that can be trusted. We have to proudly redefine global Britain as a force for truth and good in the world. We have to try to lead with hope, courage and humility. And that means being world leading, not world beating, as Naomi said at the very start of our discussions.
Much, Caroline, and there is surely no more urgent pressure for multilateralism than the climate crisis. We're now going to go to our press audience who are going to be asking questions. Do raise your hand if you can see that function on Zoom. And just to say that Peter Westmacott is going to have to leave us very shortly because he has another engagement to get to. If you can say your name and which outlet you're from and to whom you're posing the question, that would be great. We've got at least 20 minutes for Q&A. May I please bring in John Peet from The Economist to ask the first question.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for the relaunch. I wanted to ask, I think probably Emily, but perhaps Caroline might comment on it too, whether your campaign should be pushing the government to align with EU veterinary, sanitary and phytosanitary standards. We've just been told that food and drink exports have fallen 40% since the beginning of the year on last year. And as we all know, the problems of the Northern Ireland Protocol are very heavily linked to the difficulty of trading in food and agricultural products. If we were to align with the EU, some of those problems would be resolved.
Should I go first?
Yes, please.
Okay. Well, look, there's a whole load of holes, I think. It was a very thin deal. We knew it was a very thin deal. We knew further work was going to need to be done. But the idea that we didn't have an SPS chapter was surprising, to say the least. And we have seen the problems with with our fisheries industry not being able to export. We've seen problems with lorry drivers not being able to take in their ham sandwiches. I mean, we kind of weren't expecting there to be nothing. Now, it is said that the government was not as keen to align with the European rules on phytosanitary protections because they thought that there was an imminent deal with the United States. Now, clearly, that's not right, and I mean, I think that it brings us back to the nub of this, right? Which is what we need to do within our deals is we need to be consistent. So we cannot have, for example, a rule whereby with the European Union, who might have strict standards about, let's use the old chlorinated chicken or pork from pigs that have been reared in sow stalls, that we have a rule on that, and we say to the European Union, yes, no, we won't export anything to that. And yet through the back door, we have other deals with other countries that allows those very goods to come into the UK. And the problem then is that we then chill our ability to be able to trade with the European Union. I mean, the same goes with data protection. There are strong data protection rules in relation to the European Union. We need to make sure, surely, that we're consistent in relation to that, so that we can't be seen when we do a deal with another country to be allowing European data somehow or other to leak out of the European Union via Britain to other countries around the world. This is why we need to have a trade policy which is spelt out, and so that when we go into negotiations with other countries, we say we have an absolute rule on this. I say it's easy to talk about sow stalls. We do not have pork in our country where the pigs have been brought up in sow stalls. We don't have that. We don't do it ourselves. We don't import it. We don't export it. Without that kind of consistency, we are going to get ourselves into all sorts of trouble. And we really ought to have kind of worked that out by now. We haven't had a trade policy in our country for 50 years. We have relied on the European Union. If we want to strike out on our own, then we need to be clear about, do we want to change standards or don't we? If we do want to change standards, we need to be clear-eyed about what effect that will have.
I'm going to go now to Hugo Guy. Hugo from the Eye.
Thank you. Emily, following on from that, you said earlier that you wouldn't look to rejoin the single market, the customs union, that those debates are over. You've said just now that greater alignment is needed, at least on SPS issues, and that the number one priority for our trade policy should be, as you put it, sorting out the problems. Does that inevitably mean greater alignment across all issues? And is there a risk that you get to the point where the UK is a de facto member of the Single Market and Customs Union, albeit without any say on the rules. How do you avoid that risk? And Sir David, if I can ask a slightly separate question to you. You're a veteran of some pretty fierce intergovernmental battles over your last few years in government. It got to the point where the Theresa May government was very fractured and full of infighting. How do you compare that period to the current period of government infighting?
Here's the answer to that last question. So David, would you like to go first, and then Emily come back in on the first question from Hugo?
Thanks, Hugo. Right on subject. It's difficult to make comparisons because I'm obviously not on the inside with this. I think what I would say is that this sort of public battle and slanging match doesn't help the government, whoever the government is. It distracts people's energies, attention, bandwidth away from the day job, which is what they should be focusing on at the moment. So my view is, my view is really straightforward on this. My view is that if you work in the senior reaches of government, whether as a minister or an official or a special advisor, you have the huge privilege of being able to talk utterly frankly behind closed doors in a cabinet committee meeting, at a one-to-one with the Prime Minister. And my guiding principle is that you speak your mind completely frankly in private to those who hold power and are taking the decisions, and then you don't go around trying to justify your position afterwards. It's obviously more difficult when some people have left the government, but I think that general principle is a pretty good one, whether you're talking about Conservative or Labour or governments of any other stripe. Where they've had internecine warfare, it's never actually helped the people who are participating in it.
Emily. Oh,
well, one of us had to do that, didn't we? It's a proper Zoom call if you don't. Look, we've left the European Union, we've left the single market, we've left the customs union. We are now striking out deals on our own, but we're still close to the European Union geographically. Most of our trade is with the European Union, and what we don't want to do is to saddle ourselves with finding ourselves in a rules regime that we have created that puts up barriers with our trade with our biggest trading partner. There will always be, in order to be able to trade, there will need to be rules that you have in common. So the government at the moment are talking about the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the CPTPP, which very few people know a great deal about, which is why I've asked a very large number of questions of the government, 236, and asked them to answer them so that we have some idea. Because the Trans-Pacific Partnership is a trading bloc that is already created, that has a series of rules. And if we want to join it, we will have to sign up to those rules. Well, the question then is, are those consistent with what it is that we want to do? Will we be able to do any side deals? And will it be consistent with other trading blocs with which we want to trade too? It's a complicated matter, and it can't simply be that it is the essence of it is said, we want to be rule makers and not rule takers. I mean, essentially, Hugo, what our problem is that we are a large enough economy to feel that we should be making our rules, but not quite big enough. And so we are in this sort of intermediate state. But what we do want to do is we want to be able to trade around the world. And I personally think that we should be using the opportunity of developing our own trading policy to be able to lead higher standards around the world. So whether it is environmental standards, whether it is animal welfare standards, to be able to start using our clout at the WTO to allow nations to be able to say, actually, we want to underpin the Paris Agreement by our trading agreements that will address the issue of carbon, for example, and then we can then take a leading role. But I don't think that we should spend all our time getting ourselves tied up in knots on whether or not we're getting back into the European Union through the back door or anything else. We are not. But we do need to be realistic about the fact that they are our main trading partner.
Thank you, Emily. Ian Dunn, politics.co.uk, please. We got Ian? He's just coming in. Hi.
Hello, thank you very much for all that. Yeah, so my question is predominantly to Sir David, but I'd be interested in hearing what Emily and Caroline think as well. Is the British government's announcement of 600 medical items to India yesterday sufficient for what we're seeing in that country? And if not, what else should we be doing? And more broadly, is it time for internationalists to make the case for a big and generous British vaccine export program?
I think on your first point, it's the right first step to take, but I'd hope that that is being backed up by conversations with the Indian authorities, because obviously, there's no point in making a huge announcement of help unless the Indians themselves are going to welcome and facilitate what it is you're offering. But I think we should be following up that offer, looking very actively for what else we could do, whether that is money to enable the Indians to purchase additional equipment, oxygen and the like themselves, or whether that is the supply of material, or whether it is looking at whether there are ways in which to boost their manufacturing capability, which seems to be a big problem, but hard to see how that can be solved quickly. On your point about a UK export thing, I mean, the problem with India seems to be less the vaccine. I mean, they're one of the biggest vaccine manufacturers anywhere in the world, but they have very serious issues in terms of distributing and administering those vaccines. So while I certainly wouldn't rule out looking at ways in which we could supply vaccinations to India, though, the reality, the democratic governments everywhere do have a particular and primary duty to their own citizens, and one cannot, I think, just ignore that and say it is of no account. But I think it's fair to look at the opposite. But actually, what I would be asking is whether there's more that could be done to help India's great manufacturing capability in vaccines to be turned into a more effective distribution administration program, and appears to be happening at the moment.
Caroline, would you like to come in on that vaccination for the world point, please?
I would, thank you very much. I mean, what is happening in India is both an absolutely tragic disaster on a humanitarian level, but it is also the greatest threat, I think, as well, that we face right now to all of us. So I welcome the fact that the British government has taken one step, but I hope that it will do a lot more, and I hope that it will use what convening power it has to make sure that all countries that are in a position to do so do much more to be able to make sure that India is able to address the unfolding crisis there. I think in the slightly longer term, it will mean things like the UK blocking the move for a WTO waiver, a TRIPS waiver, which you'll know is all about the intellectual property rights overseen by the WTO. The UK is one of the countries blocking a move by around 60 developing countries to say that they want and need the technology and the know-how and the generic rights to set up their own vaccines. I appreciate that's not going to solve the problem tomorrow, but it is something that we should absolutely be unblocking now, because sadly pandemics are not going to go away, even if we do manage to get on top of this one. But we also need, I think, to be recognizing that, it's been said many times, but it is true that we are not safe. None of us are safe until all of us are safe. And if that means looking as well at some way of sharing the vaccines that we have enough, I think, on order to be able to inoculate the population in the UK around 3 times over. I think we should be looking to share that out of enlightened self-interest. It's the right thing to do, but it's also, I think, a way of protecting us. We already know that the Indian variant looks likely to be in the UK right now. It's in all of our interests to work together to the best of our abilities.
Thank you. I'd now like to bring in Andrew Woodcock, please, from The Independent. No. Okay, we've lost Andrew for now, so we'll come back to him. I'd like to go to Adam Payne from Politics Home, please. Can we bring Adam in? Yeah. Yeah, he's just coming.
Can you hear me?
We can. Hi, Adam. Go ahead.
Sorry about that slight delay. Good morning. Thanks for having me. I've just got a question for Sir David and Sir Peter. It's about Northern Ireland and the situation there. The government has faced calls to convene an urgent summit with the government of Ireland to discuss the tension and the recent violence there, but has so far refused. Is there anything you'd like to see the government do in regards to Northern Ireland, which it hasn't done already or isn't currently doing? And how serious do you think the situation is in Northern Ireland, perhaps in historical terms?
It's coming through. So if I could ask David to keep this response as brief as possible, please.
Northern Ireland brief. I think that the crisis is serious in Northern Ireland. I don't think it's going back to what the Troubles were like in the 70s or 80s, but I think there's a very serious risk that the devolved institutions could collapse within the next 12 months, and or that the Stormont election campaign becomes one where the defining issue is the protocol, and with the opinion dividing very largely on sectarian lines. And I think that is just deeply, deeply dangerous and depressing for future Northern Ireland. I think both sides have to compromise. I think both the UK government needs to accept publicly that the protocol which it's signed, ratified, campaigned for is there to stay, and that it will implement that, and that implementation will require some difference in the treatment of trade between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. I think, though, that the EU also needs to compromise. The EU justified treating Northern Ireland as exceptional, dealing with it in withdrawal agreement negotiations rather than in the negotiations for the future trade partnership, on two principles: that it was necessary because it was essential to the EU's interests to preserve peace and stability in Northern Ireland, and on grounds of proportionality, because the risk to the single market was insignificant, given that cross-border trade represented a tiny fraction of UK-EU trade, let alone the single market as a whole. Those two principles apply every bit as strongly today as they did in 2017 when the EU was making those arguments to Theresa May's government. So I think the EU needs to be looking actively at how they can, in Michel Barnier's phrase, de-dramatise the need for checks. We made huge progress, May government's approach in fleshing out what that would look like, and it would have been a lot less onerous as it was envisaged then than the current approach by the EU appears to be insisting upon. So compromise on both sides is needed, and it cannot come too soon.
Thank you. And Adam, I'm sorry, but Peter Westmacott has had to leave us. So next question is going to be coming in from Aubrey Allegretti from The Guardian. Morning, Aubrey.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you to the panellists and for Best for Britain for putting on the event. I wanted to ask two quick questions of Sir David. When it comes to what's best for Britain, we've seen lots of concerns and questions raised about lobbying within Whitehall by civil servants and politicians. As a former Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, how disturbed were you by the revelations, and what changes to the rules around lobbying for both civil servants and politicians would you like to see? And very quickly, I just wanted to pick you up on your answer to Hugo. I appreciate your point that people should make their representations privately and then be more discreet publicly. But what do you make of Dominic Commoning's accusations? He's levelled the charge the PM acted potentially unlawfully in the case of his flat. So shouldn't that be something that he is entitled to make the public aware of?
I know that David has a very hard stop in 2 minutes' time, so back to you, David, and then we may be able to squeeze in.
Right, and actually, I will have to be quick on this. But I think that on the Cummings point, I clearly, I've not been a part of the current government, and therefore I'm in no position to comment on what actually happened in those internal negotiations. It seems to me that if Mr. Cummings has substance to those allegations, he should report them to the the relevant authorities. I mean, my view on this is that transparency is by and large the best antidote. The ministers are meeting senior people from business, from charities, from trade unions every day of the week. Now, all those meetings count as lobbying. What is important is that those external contacts are properly registered and published so that everybody can see what happens. I mean, I'd be very worried if ministers weren't talking to anybody outside Whitehall. And also that when there is a decision about letting a contract or something, that it is seen to have been done fairly according to established rules, and the proper assessment has been made. And I think that is the best way in which to approach things, and that provides the sort of best safeguards to the public that things are being done well.
Thank you very much, David. We've got time, I think, probably just for one or two more questions. So I'm going to bring forward Will Hutton, please.
Well, first of all, congratulations. But I've enjoyed it very much. I must say, I want to put this to both Caroline and to all of the panelists, actually. I find it disconcerting that whilst, you know, a well-intentioned internationalism is, of course, to be embraced, that you have no model for your or conception, it seems to me, for an ongoing relationship with the European Union. Do you imagine it that Britain will be like Switzerland, in which case a kind of raft of kind of particular kind of treaties are signed? We're in a kind of permanent kind of process of renegotiation of our relationship. It seems to me very perplexing that you can't, almost defeatist, that you've kind of thrown up your hands in dismay and said, there's nothing to be done. We can't join the single market. We can't join the customs union. You know, all we can do is have kind of the best relationship we possibly can. But what will those relationships be like? What model do you have in your head? Is it the European Economic Area? Is it Switzerland? Is it some sui generis relationship that Britain's going to have? Or are we just going to have ad hoc kind of improvements, if we can negotiate them, to what is readily recognized, widely recognized as an inadequate treaty? I'm just, you know, I understand why you're in the position that you're in, but it feels to me, an onlooker, that you've just raised the white flag.
Thank you, Will. I might take that one myself, actually, having not yet answered a question. And it's a question that's facing both, I think, the British government and our counterparts in the EU, of what kind of relationship we want to build between our two economies, and also, you know, those beautiful, intangible relationships that are less transactional, that we've lost as a consequence of losing our freedom of movement. And those are questions that are just going to have to be thrashed out over the next few years. But I think our polling, at least, is such a great start, because it shows that absolutely widespread support for cooperation with the EU. We need urgently to improve the TCA. It is not working for business, and therefore having a negative impact on growth and jobs and all the rest of it. That's the urgent priority, and then over time we can begin to think about what new models might emerge and what that might be. But you're right to have that frustration. I'm going to go, I think, finally to one more question, I think, from, we've just got time, I think, if Caroline and Emily don't have to jump off immediately, from Dorian Linsky, and that will be our final question of the morning. Is Dorian still there, coming in? He'll be with us in a second.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, it seemed over the past. Can you hear me? Yeah, good. So it seemed over the past year, I can't understand why the Brexit is a bit of the whole issue is a bit of a third rail for the Labour leadership, and it's not something that sort of Keir Starmer wants to, wants to sort of highlight and kind of revive those sort of divisions. What does Labour really sort of want at the moment on this subject, in terms of, in terms of changing the deal? When Labour does want to talk about it, what does Labour want?
Emily.
I kind of feel as though that was what my speech was about, but let me re-emphasize. within the deal itself, there were mechanisms there for patching the holes, for further discussions, for making sure that there was a recognition that the deal was thin, that it had been against a hard deadline, and that further work needed to be done. So rather than it ever being, just to answer the last question, it ever being, let's have another model, it is, of course, a British model. Of course, we will have a particular relationship, but we need to make sure that that work continues to be done. And our concern is that we have a government that is currently saying that any problems that there are simply teething problems and not structural problems. And so the work that we're doing as an opposition at the moment is engaging with businesses that are suffering, all kinds of problems, highlighting them, trying to make helpful suggestions as to how we make sure that that deal is better. But without a doubt, as problems arise, and they're not all there now, but they will arise in the future, we need to make sure we have a sufficiently good, pragmatic, realistic relationship with the European Union that we all know that it's in everybody's interest to sort those problems out. That's what our attitude to the European Union is at the moment, is that we need to engage and not be afraid. As I say, the government just seems to be saying, everything's sorted, nothing to see here, let's scuttle off and talk to Australia. No, we need to make sure that we have our relationship with the European Union properly fixed so that we can trade with them easily and well. And then, of course, we can also do deals with other countries around the world, but let's make sure that we're clear about our priorities.
Thank you, Emily. And just finally back to Caroline, who wants to respond to Will Hutton's question. Caroline.
Well, I did just want to respond to Will, because there's certainly no white flag coming from the Green Party. And we see a progress over time when I think we will see our future back in the EU. I can't put a time period on that, but I think, for example, that we're going to see quite soon more of a push for the kind of veterinary side agreement that we've already just touched on recently around SPS standards. I think we will see more of a momentum behind freedom of movement. I think we'll see more momentum as well around things like Erasmus. The Green Party does think that rejoining the customs union would actually solve many of the problems that are already being felt by so many of our businesses up and down the country, and also in terms of the relationship with Northern Ireland. So we are upfront about saying that. Obviously, that's something that has to happen over time. It has to probably happen incrementally as people recognise just how thin the current TCA agreement is. And I think the only way we're going to get consent in the country for that is when the country comes to that conclusion itself. And that is beginning to happen, and it will go on happening over the time. But we still see our future ultimately as part of the EU.
Thank you very much to all of our speakers for their generosity with their time and answering questions this morning. Thank you to the press for your insightful questions. But most of all, thank you to everybody who's been watching online, to our supporters. We literally could not do this without you. Thank you very much. We're here to stay, and we'll be seeing you again very soon. Have a good day.